Welcome to episode 93 of Pastured Poultry Talk, the show that gives you a 360 look at the business of pasture-raised poultry. I'm your host, Mike Badger, and today I'm going to be joined by master breeder and podcaster Kenny Troiano of the Breeders Academy. If you go digging around in this show archives, you'll see that I have several episodes focused on heritage birds and breeding. I'll link to all those episodes that I can in the show notes at pasturedpoultrytalk.com/93. The most recent show featured Erin Angulo and her Delaware Chicken Project. As you listen to my episode with Kenny, you'll hear some of the common refrains from Erin's interview. And that's not surprising. Kenny taught at several of the SPN conferences, and his teachings are in place in a lot of places. Here's a question I want you to ask yourself. Self, am I a dangerous breeder? That might not be the question you expected, but think about that for just a second. Now, Kenny's going to answer that question in his own way, right? We're not going to actually label you a dangerous breeder, but he has some ideas about what makes people a dangerous breeder. You're grading your own paper on this one. Nobody's going to really know. I hope that as we go through this conversation, you'll just kind of pick up on some things that you need to do, should do as you start breeding, or give you a different perspective about what it is you're trying to achieve, right? Because that's where everything kind of starts, is what are you trying to achieve? And I brought Kenny on the show to give us some of that good old-fashioned teaching, because sometimes when I talk with breeders who aren't teachers, we tend to leave a lot of gaps in information. If you've ever entertained the idea of breeding any poultry, this is a must-listen-to episode, because Kenny will give you those first steps in the journey. These are the things that you need to know to be successful. Kenny shares what I think is unconventional wisdom about sourcing your breeder flock. He covers how to set up the mating system. You've no doubt heard many breeders say they keep only 10% of their offspring as future breeders, but Kenny will tell us if that's a good number or not. And perhaps what I enjoy most about this chat is we don't have to endure the my heritage bird is better than your hybrid talking points, right? We're above that discussion in this episode. So if that's what you want to hear, skip it. I just saved you about an hour of your life. In fact, we discuss hybrid vigor and some points to consider when breeding hybrids. This is a wide-ranging episode with a lot of conversation, a lot of ground. If you're serious about breeding, I have no doubt you're going to want to cue this up and listen to it multiple times. Let me finally just say that Kenny has offered a discount to his Breeders Academy. The Breeders Academy is a subscription-based membership site where Kenny provides a lot of learning resources, articles, coaching, mentoring, one-on-one community, multiple community networking opportunities, those kinds of things, where he dives deep in the breeding process and helps you be successful. It's that mentor that he talks a lot about in his interview. You'll be able to find that special link at pasturedpoultrytalk.com/93. Now let's go ahead and jump in and chat with Kenny Troiano. Yeah, I know you're an author, you're a breeder, you're an educator. Kind of expand on that for folks and let them know what you're all about.
Well, I'm Kenny Troiano. I've been writing for magazines, poultry magazines, for over 20 years now. And I'm all about the creating a strain, improving a strain, maintaining a strain. The way I started was my local feed stores knew I raised chickens, and they would just send people over to me for questions and what have you. And my daughters would overhear me talking to them. And then I also had the poultry magazines, which my daughters read. And they just kept telling me, hey, Dad, you could do a lot better than these guys. So I told them, I go, if you think you could do it and you think it's that easy, you do it. So my daughter did. She started sending in articles to the magazines, asking me questions and writing up the articles. And they published everything she wrote. After about 2 years, she was she was maybe getting tired of it, but she was getting busy in school. And she just said, hey, Dad, I need a break. So So I said, okay, let me continue. I didn't want them to forget about her. So I said, let me write a couple articles, and if you want to come back, you can. So I wrote a 4-part series on selection, and it really took off. It got a lot of attention. I started getting letters and stuff. This is kind of before I even had a computer. Before I knew it, I was writing articles for the magazines every month, and I still have. I've been ever since. And then about 4 or 5 years later after that, I wrote up my first book on breeding. It did pretty well. And then about 5 years later, I think after that, maybe 6, I wrote another one on breeding, which was kind of a part 2. But I was kind of getting tired of the book thing. I was getting a lot of people asking me questions from all over the world, and I thought, God, it would be really cool to start up something like a magazine, but an online magazine, and where the people could subscribe and learn more about breeding. And I thought it'd be really neat to be able to not only write my articles, but to do like video, audio, PDFs, all the downloadable PDFs, all that kind of stuff. And that's kind of how the website came about, the Breeders Academy. All my breeding information, everything I've learned in the past kind of came to me just through at first trial and error, having great mentors, and then the necessity to learn this stuff because I was teaching it. You're teaching people something, but you're actually teaching yourself. And then from there, I started learning the value of breeding programs and things like that. And I started applying what I was learning from my mentors and what I was learning on my own to my fowl. Saw great improvement, great results, started providing this to other people, and they were getting the same results. And it just took off from there.
Where are some of the poultry magazines that people might have read your articles in?
Well, there's a couple. There's one in the South Africa, which I can't remember the name of it. There's one in England. They would put articles now and then. A couple of them in Mexico, a couple of them in Philippines. The ones here in America would be the Poultry Press, which is what most people, your listeners, would know about, and then another one called the Gamecock. So I wrote in a lot of different magazines. We'll
put a link to all this stuff that we can in the show notes of the episode. That would be at pasturepoultrytalk.com/93. And we'll link out to all that stuff. Cause you actually do a podcast too, which called Bred to Perfection. Looks like it's a lot of fun for you. You do it with your wife.
You know, it became the marketing arm to the Breeders Academy. And it just was very evident that I needed some way to get people to learn about me. So, you know, by listening to me, and they're going to get to, you know, that old saying, get to know, like, and trust someone. And then you get to figure out whether they know what they're talking about, have the information that you're looking for. And it just became a great way to promote us and the website. And it became fun. I mean, Nancy and I, my wife, we have a great time with this podcast. So much so that I didn't just go in at little, buying the cheapest microphone or everything. We bought like the most expensive stuff you could get that's on the market because we knew this was big. If we were going to do this website, we had to do the podcast. And so we might as well just go all in and just get the best we can and try to keep the sound, maintain a really good sound, and just try to make it fun to listen to, entertaining, informative, and all that kind of stuff. So we're getting a great response from the Bred to Perfection. Right now, I wouldn't say it's a true podcast in the sense. We're not using a proper platform. We're using YouTube. And the only reason is it just got too busy. Everything just took off. We got the opportunity to do some huge interviews with people like Don Schreider, and we got one coming up here with Jeff Maddox and a number of others. And we couldn't stop. We just had to kind of take advantage of these opportunities and put some things on hold so that we didn't miss them. I'm hoping to get a really good hosting. I was talking to Mike about it. I know he uses a really good one, and get this thing on iTunes and Google with a Google podcast and a number of those other ones. And then everybody can start downloading them. But for now, you can go on YouTube and just, put in Bred to Perfection, and you'll be able to listen to what we have available right now. And, I think you'll like it. They're fun.
Yeah. And I will pull out a couple episodes here as we go through our interview. So wanted to make sure we got that plug in early. Now, one question though I do have for you, Kenny, you describe yourself as a master breeder. Can you elaborate on exactly what a master breeder is? And if in terms of like, maybe, I don't know, is it a certification? Is it a mindset? Is it a experience type of thing?
There is a certification for it. I know the APA certifies master breeders. I've got a couple of them on my website, and that's great. And they deserve it. And I've always told people that you should never really call yourself a master breeder. It's a title that other people give you. And that's something I was getting all the time. So I just kind of went with it at that point. I just think if you know what you're talking about, you're getting great results in your fowl, and, you're using, good breeding programs, and you understand the use of proper genetics, things like that. I would say Don Schreider. I mean, he's known for his brown red leghorns, and that's just because he's got great fowl and he knows what he's doing. He's earned the title of master breeder. And so that's what I would call a master breeder. Someone who not only who produces great fowl and has great information, but they pass that information to others. There's a lot of people out there struggling when it comes to breeding, and it's these handful of people that make the difference. And to me, those are the master breeders in the world.
Yeah, I appreciate that. We had a previous conversation where you talked with me about some of my breeding questions. And my lead up to that was, there's a lot of people out here in the world, in the internet, talking about breeding. And, sometimes getting a good base of information is very, very hard, even with all that information that's out there. So that's why I talked to you before. That's why you're on this show talking about breeding, is we want to back it up a little bit and make sure some people have the proper understanding. One distinction I want to make is you focus on American game. Briefly take a moment and tell us what American game fowl are and how they differ from chickens.
Well, let me say this. I have been raising American games for most of my life. My wife raises the Splash Morans. That's her specialty. So I've got, and I've raised domestic chickens too. And so I've got experience on both sides. And what I teach as far as breeding methods, breeding programs, genetics, those apply to all birds, all chickens, not just American game. I mean, where it differs as far as American games is, or any breed, is how you select your birds, because the traits are going to be different depending on the breed you're raising. And as far as species, the only thing would be different would be the actual genetics. The breeding programs and the methods of breeding, the way in which you would improve or create a strain is the same. For me, American games are like the most beautiful birds out there. They got the best personality. My hens hatch all their eggs. I have incubators. I use them once in a while, but for the most part, the hens hatch their eggs. They're great mothers. They're fun to watch. They're just beautiful birds. They have a rich history. If it wasn't for American game, well, not American game per se, but the game fowl breed in general, we wouldn't have the domestic chickens we have today, because from the wild jungle fowl, Southeast Asia, the red jungle fowl, if it wasn't for bringing those from the jungle with the little interest that people had at the time, to tell you the truth, I know cockfighting is controversial, but it was the first actual human spectator sport. It's outlawed in many parts of the world, but it's still going strong too. That's not my thing. I don't support it. I'm not that kind of person. I just love the breed. But if it wasn't for game fowl, we wouldn't have the chickens we have today, because it went from the jungle fowl to the game fowl because of the interest in that. And it just spanned countries. It brought politicians together, common people together, politicians, rich people, and common people all in the same place. And it became a place of society where society got together. And then from there, you started getting different shoots from chickens in, barnyards and whatever, things like that. And then eventually in the 1800s, you had the Industrial Revolution, and chickens were a part of that as well. And then we're at where we're at today, where we have, the Cornish cross is a production bird that has created a lot of meat for a lot of people. We got the Leghorn type bird who creates a lot of eggs for a lot of people. But we all owe that and the backyard chickens we have today to game fowl. In fact, the game fowl was almost our national bird. They only lost to the bald eagle by one vote. So wow. I just love the bird in itself. It's a great bird. So
basically, you're saying that there's a lot of genetic history in the game fowl. And one thing you will always hear about, especially from the breeders and people who want to breed, is the genetic diversity. Would it be safe to say that the game fowls still hold a lot of genetic diversity should we need it in the future?
Definitely. Yeah. No. I've talked to a number of people in the industry, I guess you could say, who flat out told me that they believe someday, with the diseases that are out there today, they wouldn't doubt that it would be the game fowl that would save all chickens. That they have that kind of strength and endurance and, like you said, genetic diversity, that they literally could save the breeds that are out there and everything. You mentioned the Delaware a minute ago. Whether a game bird can actually save the Delaware, no, but it can save the chicken. And from there, new breeds could be rediscovered, things like that. I actually think the breed as a whole is very valuable, and I think we should cherish them, honestly.
I guess it's not a perfect segue, but it's close enough to go where I want to go next, which is commercial breeding. And I want to talk for a moment in this transition to where we're going to what the commercial poultry breeders have done right, because you've kind of alluded to it, and I'll tie it in my thought here real quick, is the game fowl are supplying genetics in the past, the present, and maybe the future. They may hold the key to diversity in the future, to creating new options and better options than what we have right now. And I think, at least from what I see, the commercial breeding lines that are out there, things like Highlines or the Cornish Cross you mentioned, things like that, they're creating new strains all the time. But I'd like to ask you what those breeders have gotten right so far from your perspective. From where you sit, Kenny, what's the commercial poultry breeders done right?
What they've gotten right was they've learned to take advantage of hybrid vigor. Hybrid vigor is an amazing thing. You put two birds together. You got two birds. Let's say you have let's say a white Plymouth Rock and a Cornish bird. As them by themselves, they represent 100%, of their potential. You put those two birds together, and now you've got offspring that are 130% of their potential. So you've actually created something like a meat bird that gains weight and is ready for processing in 37 days. It's basically a baby chick. Mm-hmm. So they've found a way to market this bird and produce this bird in a way that saves money and reaches a lot of people. So, in the past, they would use some hybrid vigor for like crossing, like say a Delaware with I think maybe a Barred Rock or something like that, and they got some hybrid vigor. But the discovery of the Cornish bred to the white Plymouth Rock is an amazing, amazing offspring. And the same thing with production whites. Like the Leghorns, by crossing those with other breeds, you get birds that are laying like over 300 eggs a year, which is amazing.
Right.
That's what they got right.
Yeah. So the flip side of that, then, what have they gotten wrong?
In a lot of ways, they're bringing them too close. Inbreeding depression is going to eventually come into play if it hasn't already, which is going to increase disease. It's going to lower the resistance to disease and bring in other problems. That's where I think they're going wrong. And I know why they do it. They've got these grandparent lines. They don't let anybody have them. They're very protected lines. I was just talking to John Schreider recently, and he said the last 10, 15 years, which I didn't even know about, they started introducing into the Cornish cross the white Leghorn, and so they could increase egg production for the hatcheries. So they could put out more offspring and stuff like that. And that might have just saved them, because before that, it was just the white Plymouth Rock bred to a Cornish bird. And I think they actually started getting into trouble. So I think they had to do something. I think eventually they're going to box themselves in a corner, and they're going to have to do something soon to save the breeds we have today as far as when it comes to production. That makes sense?
It does. Makes perfect sense. And and when you look at the Cornish cross, you can see there's lots of disease, not disease, that's the wrong word. There's lots of health issues that spring up with those meat birds in today's market as a result of some of the success they've had with their hybrid vigor, right? There's challenges with those genetics that we raise because of the success that you talked about.
The biggest challenges there is the fact that they do grow so fast. And they grow so big so fast. Their bodies just can't handle it. And their hearts can't handle it. And they grow, 37 days, like I said, they're basically a baby chick. They're up to 5 pounds or whatever. What's kind of saving the egg production, I think they are boxing themselves in the corner when it comes to the white egg layers, the production side of it. Now you got Freedom Rangers, and you got Isa Browns, and those are hybrids too. I don't raise those myself. I'm sure there's some problems there as well, or there will be eventually.
Just as a side note, I do spend a lot of time in a lot of my work helping people raise those Cornish cross in better ways and in healthier ways so that they don't suffer from all those things. But it's a skill set. It's a knowledge skill set. Given what we've talked about here, the history of the game fowl, the commercial breeding programs, where do the small scale farm, or the backyard poultry breeder fit into this in terms of opportunities?
It depends on where you're at. I mean, if you just want a few chickens in your yard and you want to have a few eggs, then you can go down to the feed store and get yourself some baby chicks and start. If you're interested in actually creating a strain, getting a nice breed and keeping them going, then you really do need to find a real reputable breeder who carries the birds you're looking for, and then start breeding them from there and making sure you're using a proper breeding program and things like that, and not just relying on bringing the best of the best. But I think where the average backyard breeder falls short, or the problems they're facing, is they're not educated. They really don't understand what it takes to really breed the right fowl. They're getting birds from, let's say, the hatcheries or from the feed stores that are more or less hybrid birds, and they're trying to create families from that, which you can't. It's really tough to do because hybrids don't reproduce themselves. When you put two birds together, you're going to get mismatch of genes. You're going to get a lot of variables in the offspring. You're going to see offspring that are large and small, different colors, you name it. And you got to know what to do with that. If you want to create a strain, I can guarantee you, if you were to keep going, the strain you create would be so different than what you thought they were going to be. That's for sure.
Going back to your podcast here and on this subject of breeders, you have 2 episodes that really caught my eye. I listened to them. I enjoyed them. The one is titled, There Are 4 Types of Breeders. And the other one is called, There's the 3 Most Dangerous Breeders. What makes a dangerous breeder?
As far as the most dangerous breeders is the ones who, like I said, they're either producing birds that are hybrids or they're breeding from hybrids. And what they don't realize is that the hybrid vigor has a ceiling. You can only go so high before you start falling. Because like I told you, the offspring, they go up to, let's say, 130%. But and then you breed those hybrids together, they don't stay at 130. They don't even stay at 100. They actually drop down to 80. So you get quite a different bird once you start breeding those hybrids. And you start bringing in new birds. You know, a lot of these breeders, these so-called dangerous breeders, they're bringing in new birds all the time. Every year they're bringing in new birds in their flock. They're never trying to breed anything pure. So they're always relying on outcrossing to get the hybrid vigor that they're hoping to get, which they never get. And then they just introduce so many variables within the family, or what they think of the family, and so many genes, so that when someone buys those birds and they breed them, the results, the offspring that they get is unpredictable. There's no uniformity whatsoever. And then they're wondering what happened. I think if you're going to do crossing like that, you got to have a reason to do it. There's got to be a purpose for it. I think most people are using crossbreeding as their only method of breeding. You got to have an idea what you hope to achieve when you're buying them and you're going to breed them. And I think most of the people out there selling birds don't even know that. They're just producing birds. They're just trying to produce as many birds as possible, and they have no idea what they're doing or what they're trying to achieve. And so there's no predictability in their offspring, and there's no striving for purity of blood. And so when you look at their farm, I think that's the first thing you should look at is how uniform are their birds? How many different families? I mean, you look at a breeder who has more than 3 families, then you got a problem. Because a lot of these guys will say, you know, they'll have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 families, and they just want to make sure they have the right bird for everybody, you know, and then they play what they call the name game. So if you ask for a certain type of bird, whether they have it or not, they're going to say they have it, you know, or they're going to try to, if it looks like this type of bird, that's what they're going to put the name on it, place the name on. And then when you're looking for birds, I mean, as far as some of these, what I would call most dangerous breeders, I would say most of their birds don't represent their breed when it comes right down to it. And a lot of these guys are actually buying birds from hatcheries, trying to create a family from that. Most of those birds from hatcheries do not represent their breed. They're far from it. And when you try to breed them, you're not going to get the egg production that you were hoping for. There's hardly any meat on the carcass, and they really lack the conformation and color that they should have when it comes to those type of birds. So those are the things, as far as your type of listener, that's the type of thing I would look for. And then also they don't selectively breed, and they don't cull out substandard or defective birds. So if you're going to buy birds from someone, check out those birds closely, have a really good idea of what you should expect from that particular breed. Look them over, make sure they're not sick in any way, make sure they've got great vigor, they're active, and then look for any defects they may have. And I don't care what some breeders say, oh, he just has ducktail, that's no problem. Or, oh, he has a crooked breastbone, that's no big deal. You know, any defect, you get that bird in your hand. If you feel or see anything, do not buy that bird. Defects are recessive. Put 2 birds together that have the same recessive trait, 2 copies, it's going to produce all offspring that carry that trait. Defects are very dangerous for the survivability and of the breed, and for your strain as well.
Yeah. Now you mentioned a couple things in there. I just want to swing back and clarify. Now that's the second time I think that you mentioned the hybrid vigor, and you threw out the number 130%. So you take 2 groups and you combine them for a hybrid, and you get 130% growth. Is that just an estimate? You know,
it's just my example. There's no science behind it. When I do it here, even when I cross birds, that's what it looks like to me. When the purer the 2 strains you're crossing, the better hybrid vigor you're going to get. So if you have 2 really good families that are they're uniform and consistent, and you put them together, you're going to get pretty good hybrid vigor. And it seems like I said, it's like 120, 130% better. They're bigger birds, they're stronger, they're more active, they're better all the way around. And I do know that if you were to take a brother and sister from those offspring and breed them together, thinking you're going to do better even than that, like I said, hybrid vigor has a ceiling. They literally drop noticeably. Like I said, it's not where they were or where their parents were. It's way below that. Yeah. And so you're going to see so much variability in the offspring from size, weight, conformation, color, you name it. They're just not the same bird at all. Do it. I mean, I remember doing it when we were kids. When I was a kid, my dad's idea was, why should we buy all these Cornish crosses? Why don't we just breed them? Boy, I still to this day remember the offspring we got from that. It was crazy.
Define that other term you're using, family. When you say family, what do you mean?
A group of birds that share the same characteristics, traits, and basic genome. A family, when you put together and breed, you're going to get predictable results. The offspring are going to come out very predictable, and they're going to come out uniform. That when you look at them, if I were to sell you birds from my farm, I could come over to your farm a few years later, and I could tell you they're my birds because they have very, very specific traits. They may be like, let's say, like a Buckeye breed or something like that. But I can tell you, if you were to look at different Buckeye breeders and match up their birds, there's subtle differences in each of those families. Just because of the way that person selects them. Each breeder is going to select for a different trait. They're going to have the basic conformation. They're going to look like Buckeyes and everything, but I can guarantee you that one breeder's birds are going to look different than another's in some way or other.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's kind of like your signature, right?
Exactly. And that's all, that's the fun part of actually creating and maintaining your own strain is, yes, you're breeding and raising a bird like the Splash Morans, let's say, you're going to be able to make them your own still. And they're, like I said, they're going to have very specific differences compared to other breeders. And that's the fun part, is to actually improve the breed in a way that doesn't change what makes them that breed, like their conformation and color, but you make them better than they were before. And to me, that's the whole goal. That's the fun of it for me.
Kind of my last question on this dangerous breeder idea. It's just something I just have questions about. Like I see it happening, and it seems to be pastured poultry producers tend to want to do this more than I see other people in it. So maybe that's just my frame of reference. But, there's people out there who go out and they pick up a commercial hybrid, from one of the main breeding lines in the country, and then they just cross them. Like you said, either with themselves or they pick up another breed and they cross them to that. But they have the intention of, quote unquote, creating a bird that's ideal to pasture. I'm sure you've seen this happen. But from what you've seen and what you experienced, does that have any chance of ever kind of working out based on what you've just said and what you believe and know about breeding?
For the average person, I would say no, because they don't know what direction they want to go. They don't know what kind of breeding program they would use or methods. And a breeding program is basically a number of different methods put together in the right order at the right time for the right length of time. And I think if you're going to breed, if you're going to do something like that, you really got to know what you're looking to achieve. And you got to kind of have an idea what kind of breeding methods you're going to use and the breeding programs you're going to use to make it work. And then know from year to year that you're going to have to selectively breed them and kind of push them in the direction you want to go. And at first, you're going to see big differences in the offspring. It's going to be wide. You're going to have so many different variables in the beginning. But you'll notice as you go, you can fine-tune that bird. And by maybe 5 years, maybe 10 years down the line, you're going to notice that you're going to be culling out less. They're going to be a little more fine-tuned. You're not going to have big differences and big variables. And that's when you're going to know you're on the right track. So it does take a while. And
but you can't go injecting. You can't go back out and buy another hybrid from 2 or 3 years later and put it back into that line, or you'll be starting from the same. You'll be starting over again, basically, right?
Yeah, basically, yeah, exactly. You'll be starting over. Once you make up your mind that the birds have, maybe they're not going to be you don't know what they're going to look like exactly, but they have the basic traits that you're looking for, and you're not seeing huge weaknesses, then you would not bring in outside blood. That's the worst thing you can do with any family, especially when you're starting to make progress, is bring in outside blood, because you've changed everything. Even if you're raising like barred Plymouth Rocks and you bring in someone else's barred Plymouth Rock, you've screwed up everything. You've messed it all up because you've introduced so many different variables, believe it or not. Even though they're the same breed, they've got maybe differences in disease resistance. They're going to have traits that are underlying, like different things as far as feather color or size or something like that. Here's a good example. There was a time when I was going to raise, and I did raise Welsh Summers. didn't want to go to a hatchery. I didn't know anybody around here that raised them. So I started looking through the internet, and everybody was pointing to two different breeders. One was on the West Coast and one was on the East Coast. So I called up the one on the East Coast. She tells me about her birds and all that, and tells me what they're all about. And I said, that sounds great. Now tell me what the common defect is. I think every breeder should know what the common defect is. If they've been breeding their birds for any length of time, they should kind of know what defects come up the most and the ones they have to deal with the most. And she says, well, I'm having white in my feathers. I go, really? Okay. Well, okay. So she was honest with me. I appreciate that. And everybody knew her as a very good breeder. I says, okay, I'll think about it. So then I called the person on the West Coast. Oh, and let me say this too. She said that she wasn't getting the white in her feathers until she brought in an outside bird. She borrowed a cock from another breeder because she wanted to improve egg color. This big thing going on these days is they want birds for egg color, but the problem is they're lacking the ability to also maintain and improve the conformation and color of the bird. So the bird itself is getting lost in this search for the right egg. If you ask me, I think that's what's going on. So then I call up the person on the West Coast and said, tell me about your birds. She told me all about her birds, everything. Everything was sounding good. And I asked her the same thing. What would you say is your common defect? She goes, oh yeah, I'm getting white in the wings. I go, wow. I go, is that a common defect with these? A common problem? She goes, well, no, I didn't have it at first, but that problem started popping up and I've been having to deal with it ever since. I go, cause I just talked to someone on the East Coast and I told her name and she's having that problem too. And she goes, oh yeah, because she borrowed a rooster from me. So a person who never had that problem now does because she borrowed a rooster from someone else to improve egg color. You wouldn't believe the genome that those birds carry. Even established families have been bred for years. There's things in there that if you keep breeding them, you're going to see little variations pop up that you're going to be able to take advantage of. And that's all without bringing in new birds. I have a family of game fowl that I've had for almost 30 years now, and I've never added outside blood to that family. And I've kept them going strong. They look 100 times better than when I first got them. And that's all through selection. That's just looking for little variations, little traits that I like, kind of breeding towards those and improving the conformation and the station and the color. And if you look at the pictures, I have them on my Facebook and I have them on my website of the birds I started with compared to the birds that I ended up with now, it's like night and day. And people are so amazed and they just can't believe that they're like, what'd you put in them? I go, I didn't put anything in them. They're just from, selective breeding by looking for the things I need, that pop up here and there. And I've just bred to it, And so there's a lot you can do by just looking at what you have, checking out the offspring and improving, looking for the few, like Don Schreider likes using the term, the top 10%. And I like that, but I like to tighten it up even more by saying, look for the standouts, look for the birds that stand out, that have what you need, what you think that the family needs to take it to the next level. And there's always a handful of birds that will do that. Sometimes only one, but there is a handful of birds. And those are the ones you want to breed to. And those are going to make the biggest difference in your family. And so when you're starting with hybrids or you're starting with a mixed flock or maybe it's a pure family like a barred Plymouth Rock, there's still going to be a lot of variables in there. It's going to take you a few years or so to weed those out. You might even have to do like an inbreeding program to weed out those defects, to get rid of the weaknesses and then fix the traits that are there. But you wouldn't believe what's hidden in that gene pool that you can take advantage of down the road without ever bringing in new blood. So I always think outcrossing is like the worst thing you'd ever do. It's got to be the last resort. It's got to be something that if you don't do, there's just no way to save this family. Somehow as far as disease resistance, all of a sudden they're sick all the time. You've gotten a serious case of inbreeding depression, which is usually due to trying to create a family with too few birds. You really need a certain amount of birds to make this work properly. Yep. And you've got to have a proper breeding program. Otherwise, you are going to reach inbreeding depression.
We had a conversation not too long ago, and you gave me some really good advice that I think I just want to pick up on, and I'll tell you what I think is the good advice, so you don't have to guess. Some of the advice you left me with was, once you figure out where you want to go, find a breeding trio and just start getting chicks on the ground. That was your first piece. And then the second piece of that was how to set up your breeding group. And I believe that it's the clan mating system, which I talked with Harvey Ussery back on episode 3 of Pasture Poultry Talk. And that was a basic program that he described. So we're going to readdress that here. But let's start with the trio and tell listeners why you recommend sourcing an adult breeding trio versus raising day-old chicks.
Yeah, that's the way a lot of people want to start. They want to go to a breeder and buy 100 chicks. And there's some benefits to that, I suppose, but you're going to lose some from disease. You're not going to exactly know what you're going to get. Normally, by the time you get down, you've weed through those chicks, you've gotten rid of the defects, the ones that are kind of sickly, whatever. You're usually left with what? 10 if you're lucky, you know? And then what's the chances of them growing up being, you know, coming out the way you were hoping they were going to come out with the right conformation, the right color and everything else? So I suggest it to you, and I suggest to other people, is actually find a good, like I said, a reputable breeder who's got a good reputation, has good fowl, is known for high quality, and go select your birds. Okay. And you're going to look at these guys like seed fowl. This is going to be the beginning of your family. And you find the best cock that is available and the best two hens. And hopefully they should represent their breed. That's so important. And by getting a trio instead of baby chicks, you see right in front of you what you're going to get for the most part. Those birds are, you know, the offspring are going to be representatives of what you're buying. That cock and those two hens. And there's really no guessing. And if you're buying from a reputable breeder and you're looking at his yard and they all look the same, chances are the offspring are going to be, you know, the same. So, and you're going to get off to a better start starting with a good trio, like either one trio or two trios, than you would with baby chicks. Most people I know that buy baby chicks to start out have horrible experiences. It never turns out the way they were hoping, and they struggle for years. Where the ones that buy a really good trio, they get off to a much better start.
Let's talk about the clan mating then. So what's the advantage of that system, and then how many groups do I need to set up?
Spiral mating, clan mating, it's called a bunch of different things. And basically you're using a rotational system. So to make that work and work properly, you have to have a certain amount of birds. You have to have at least 3 breeding pens. So let's say you have a cock and 12 hens per pen. Okay. And you mark them, 1, 2, and 3. Or A, B, and C. Let's do it that way. One pen being A, the other pen being B, and the other pen being C. And so what happens is every year you're going to breed the cock in that pen to those hens. And then the next year you're going to take the best cock, whether it's the old cock or the young cockerels coming up, the best one, and breed it to the next pen over. But all the hens that were in that pen and all their pullets are going to stay in the pen that they came from. And you're going to do that for each pen. And what this is going to do each year, it's going to maintain genetic diversity. And you could literally keep that family going forever by using a proper clan mating system. Now, the only problem I have with the clan mating system is that it's a great maintenance program, and that's kind of what I call it. I have a program I call the Founders Program. It was designed to help you create a family, to create, maintain, and improve your family for years to come. So it has a lot of elements to it, and the spiral mating, clan mating system is one of them. The only problem with the clan mating system is you can maintain the family. You can improve them a little bit by culling out the defective substandard birds or sick birds, and you can do some selection as far as improving the family, but it's not a great system for improving a family overall. If you want to improve a family, you need to do another system parallel to that one simultaneously, and that would be like what I would call an improvement program, which would consist of like a line breeding program. So you could have like a half a dozen different line breeding pens going on at the same time that you would breed like the best cock you had, and the best hens would be in this line breeding program. And then you breed the cock to his daughter, and then the next year to his granddaughter and to his great granddaughter. And the offspring from that can be used to actually improve the birds that are in your clan mating system. And you can introduce those. They're all the same family. They're all the same birds, but you would use the birds from your improvement program to improve the birds in your spiral mating system. And that way you're not just spinning your wheels, because you can spin a family, like the rotation part of it, you could spin a family forever, and you can keep that family going. And you're not going to exactly deteriorate if you're good at culling and selection, but you're just not going to see huge improvement from year to year. It would take years to see the kind of improvement that you would get from a line breeding program. So that's my big thing, is that the clan mating system is a great system, but it needs something along with it to keep it going. And if you're into the production side of it too, you have your breeding programs over to one side, then you have your production birds over there, and you never mix the two ever. So you never bring any birds, I don't care how good they are, from the production side of it over to your breeding system.
Now why,
does that answer your question?
Yeah. Why would you not bring the production birds back breeding?
Because there could be some contamination, and chances are they're over there for a reason. They're over there because obviously you didn't see something as far as worth breeding in the first place. And birds that tend to all of a sudden look better years down the road tend not to produce the offspring that you selected for breeding when they were younger. I usually just make it a point. I would make it a point not to mix the two. I would select your birds and stick with them. If they start showing signs of defects, being substandard of sickness, then I would cull those out. But be careful that the birds. I've never. If you go to someone's farm that has a separate system, a separate breeding system, and they have their production side, look them over carefully, and I'll bet you anything you'd have a problem finding one that's even worth breeding to. They're just different birds usually.
Sure.
If you're into the production side of it, you don't want to use your breeders for production, because then you're taking away from them, because you want those eggs. You want to hatch those eggs. You want to be able to look those chicks over and select from them, and then whatever's extra would go into your production. So my biggest advice is two things when you're breeding birds, and especially if you're doing a production side of it as well, is when you're hatching birds, hatch as many chicks as you can possibly manage and afford, so that you can select better. So that you can select the top 10% or the ones that stand out to go into your breeding program, and then the rest can go into the production side of it. And any birds that you select for breeding, the offspring, they've got to be, I would say, at least as good as the parents, but really they should be better. So you always want offspring that are better than the parents, because if they're not better than the parents, you're going to go in the wrong direction. And some people think that I've got breeding pens, I got to fill them up, I got all these birds, I'm going to breed them, why waste them? But really, you should only be breeding to the birds that actually have the potential to advance your family, not just to put two birds together to breed to produce chicks. You really want to be very specific about the birds you breed and the direction you want to go in, and be just very selective, cull hard, and you'll see improvement as you go.
Yeah, thanks for that. And now I would say that this is kind of the point in our conversation we were having, that because we were also talking about hybrids, and so you have the three groups to maintain your one set of birds. And if you're going to do hybrids, you need another three groups to do that. And you had given me, you had said, well, a good number would be 12 birds per pen. And I started doing the math, and I'm like, holy smokes, that's like, I got to have 72 breeders if I want to capitalize on hybrid vigor. So, and we had some conversation around that. And this is where I want to ask you now on my show is, if you're timid about the idea of having 36 or even 72 breeders, if you're doing hybrids, can you work with less birds? And what's more important there, the diversity of the groups or the overall quantity?
It wouldn't be so much the diversity of the groups, because you want the uniformity. The diversity just happens by the way you mix them, but by the way you rotate them, actually. But you can have, you just got to determine what's the production. How many offspring do you want to produce, and why? Okay. So you don't need to do 12 birds per pen, or like I usually tell people, at least three pens. You got to have at least a minimum of 3 pens. But if you can manage more pens, 4, 5, or 6 pens, do it, because the more pens, the better. But if you can only manage 3 pens, and you can only manage, let's say, 6 hens per pen, then do that. That's fine. The whole idea is to breed them in such a way that you're maintaining the 3 families, but you're rotating the cocks for the genetic diversity. What this does for you is it keeps you from bringing outside birds. That's the whole reason for doing it, is to keep you from having to bring in outside birds from other sources. That's the last thing you want to do. But like we were talking about, is if you're looking to produce, if your production side is going to be the production of hybrid birds, for birds that produce both good eggs and good meat, and you want to sell those to different markets, then the system would work better, so that you don't have to bring it, buy your birds from outside sources and then raise them up and grow them and then sell them. You could produce your own. Was like we said, you would maintain 2 families. So if you have 3 pens, you say you have 6 hens per pen, 3 pens per family, you would have to have the same thing for the other breed. So if you're going to produce like a Leghorn crossed to a Rhode Island Red to get offspring that produce pretty decent meat and good egg production, you're going to have to have a Leghorn family and a Rhode Island Red family, separate families. And then you'd have to have each of them would have to have their own rotation system and their own line breeding programs. So yeah, you'd have to, for every breed you do, you have to double that up.
Does this same system then apply to the other poultry like ducks, turkeys, or geese?
I believe it applies to turkeys, ducks, geese, you name it, all poultry.
Yeah.
Just, like I said, the only difference between those species is the actual genetics and what the traits you would select for. As far as breeding programs and breeding methods, it's all the same. I mean, the same thing with dogs. You would do dogs the same way. The only difference would be the genetics because they're mammals. They're different.
Right.
Birds, reptiles, fish, their genetics is different than mammals. So you'd have to put that in play and decide which traits are dominant, which are recessive, which are polygenic, things like that, depending on their species. But the actual breeding program and the methods you would use and culling and all that kind of stuff, that applies to all animals. If you look at I have all kinds of books on poultry breeding, animal breeding. I've got a whole office full. I got maybe thousands of books here, okay? And whether you're looking at the poultry breeding books or the animal breeding books, the methods are the same. It's just the genetics and the traits you select for are different.
One question that I guess to build off of this is the breeder who's thinking about starting this, and they may have their birds in mind and all that stuff, but what knowledge should they have before they get that trio, if they take your advice?
Well, the first thing I would decide is what kind of breed you want to raise, because you're going to have to stare at those birds every day. You're going to have to like them. You're not going to be raising these things for a few years. You're going to be raising these hopefully for your whole life. So you got to really take your time to decide what breed you want to raise, what's the potential for, let's say, making money, and where you want to see going with these eventually. So, and then the next thing is to learn the breed, learn the origins and the history of the breed, find out how they were created and why, and what their purpose is, and things like that, and then from there, learn how to cull them and what to select for. So you want to understand what to do when you see a sick bird. My suggestion when you see a sick bird is not to cure it or treat it, is to cull it, because that's a weakness to me, especially when you're a breeder. Any weakness is something that can drag the family down. And most diseases, even if you can fix it with medication, it's usually chronic and it shows up again. You want to determine what's a high quality bird and what's the difference between a high quality bird and a substandard bird, and those you want to cull. So you got to learn how to cull, and then also defects. Now, if you join my newsletter, which I call the Breeders Bulletin on the Breeders Academy, what some of the bonuses you would get would be how to select brood fowl, a list of defects, and a list of what traits are dominant, recessive, polygenic, things like that. So if you get that list on defects, which is a huge list, not only look at the list, but learn what those are. So that when you see and we also have this program in the Breeders Academy as well. And I always encourage my members, one of the first things they do is to go check out this program, because I've been on so many yards where they wanted me to help select their brood fowl. And I look down, they got like duck toe, which is, most people don't even understand. There's such a reason to cull these because of it actually determines the way they walk. And once you have duck toe, they all end up with duck toe. And I looked down at this bird, he had duck toe. I says, you got a problem here. So I started looking at the rest of his birds, and they all have duck toe. He just didn't even know that was a problem. Didn't have any idea. It was kind of yard blind to the whole thing. And I've walked on other people's yard, and they had defects they didn't even know existed. And it was all their birds had it because they didn't know not to select, not to breed towards it, and they needed to select against it. So get to know the defects that are out there, and know that they're all dangerous as far as they could take over your family, being recessive in nature, and learn to cull those as fast as you see them. And probably the biggest defect of all would be health and vigor, because you can't maintain a family if they're not vigorous and healthy. So that would be the next thing I would do. And again, understand the breed in such a way that you know what to select. And because whatever bird you put together, they're going to have a consequence. And if you're not selecting the right birds, 5 years down the road, they're not going to represent their breed, and then you got a problem. And then one that I think everybody neglects, and you can see it online, either people don't talk about it, or they talk about breeding and genetics in such a way that it's not practical or usable. And all it does is confuse people. And I'm just not for that. So you need to understand breeding programs, You need to understand the different breeding methods, not just the methods that are out there, but what the purpose for those methods are and how to use them, how long to use them, when to use them, things like that. They all have a purpose, even inbreeding. Everybody's scared of inbreeding, but it's a great tool for creating a strain if you know what you're doing. So, and then if you're going to get into genetics, which I suggest you do, if you're going to get into breeding, if you don't understand genetics, then you're really wasting your time, because that's going to help you determine which birds you're going to select and mate together. And it's going to help you understand the results you're going to, even before you mate those birds. So genetics is so important. And I would start by understanding Mendelism by Gregor Mendel, the laws of independent assortment, which is how dominant recessive genes work, and the law of segregation, which basically says that one trait does not affect the other. Like a lot of people want to say, oh, he's a red bird, so he's going to have this problem, or because he's got long shanks, he's going to have this other trait. Right. And most cases, those two traits don't even affect each other. Understanding Mendelism will get you a long way, and then taking a step farther and understanding what Thomas Hunt Morgan learned, what we call advanced genetics, which would be sex-linked traits and quantitative traits, measurable traits, which we call polygenic traits. Most traits are polygenic. A lot of people think everything is dominant or recessive. That's not true. Those are only the traits on the sex chromosome. But most of the traits our birds carry are polygenic traits, which means that if you look at a group of birds and you were to measure let's say you pick a trait like crooked breastbone for one thing, and you were to measure all the birds that not only have that trait, but to what degree they have that trait, and you were to put it on a graph, you would naturally see this bell-shaped curve. Anytime you see traits that are measurable like that, that's a polygenic trait. So you're always looking for the handful of birds at the far end of the bell-shaped curve that do not have that trait. They have a perfect breastbone, and those are the ones you want to breed to. So, and you got to understand that because it's a measurable trait, polygenic, which is determined by multiple genes, you're going to see different intensities for that trait. So just because they show that trait doesn't mean it can't be fixed. And that's the good news. And then maybe study a little bit on Hugo de Vries, his mutation theory, and try to get an understanding of that, because you're going to see traits that are going to pop up once in a while, and you need to know what to do about it. Some traits you can actually reproduce that trait. You can breed to that trait. You can take advantage of that trait. Some traits are not reproducible, or they're maybe lethal genes that you want to stay away from. So you need to learn about that. And then one thing I would do is learn how to use a Punnett square. Reginald Punnett created what he calls a Punnett square, that actually helps us by putting the gametes of the hen and the gametes of the rooster together, knowing which traits are dominant or recessive, putting them into the boxes. You can determine the results of your offspring by looking at that square. So you're going to know which traits are dominant and which traits are recessive, and you're going to be able to determine whether you want to do that or not. So that's what I would do. And like I said, I would go back. I would really take your time and try to learn about breeding programs and breeding methods. And like I was talking about earlier, is learning how to decipher whether the chicks are better than the parents, because those are the ones you want to breed to. I always tell people, keep a closed yard. Don't bring in outside birds. Be careful who you bring on your yard. Be careful about going on other people's yards. This is all about the integrity and security of the bloodline, biosecurity. If you're going to breed birds, have a mindset of purity of blood, and just protect that bloodline the best you can. It's all about maintaining the integrity. You want genetic diversity to a sense, because you need some variation to keep the family going, but you really do want to breed for uniformity as well. So that would be my suggestion starting out.
Yeah, so that's a pretty good reading list. And you have, like you said, you had some of those initial ebooks that you get it by signing up for the Breeders Bulletin, which I'll link to that in the show notes. And you also have the Breeders Academy that will work through all of those topics and prerequisites and information as well. And I also put a link to the Breeders Academy in the show notes. But that's your membership course that actually helps people do this. Like, you're there to help put the pieces together of everything you're talking about today on the show.
Yeah, we have a lot of great programs and a lot of great courses to support those programs, a lot of good resources. It's a great website. I love it. It's everything I thought it would be. I have plans to even make it bigger than it is now. We have so many plans to improve the site. So, another thing about the Bred to Perfection show, our podcast, is you're going to be able to hear from our members what they think of the website too, because we talk about that, and they'll tell you all about it.
So I'm wondering, Kenny, if you could look back across your decades of breeding here and just tell me, if you have one, something that comes to mind of your single biggest breeding fail that you experienced.
Oh, let me think. It's been a long time, actually. It's almost so boring nowadays because I don't have, everything's pretty predictable now. When I first started, I was trying to cure everything. When I first started, it seemed like all my birds were always sick. I had every medication on the yard, and it just seemed like I was never catching up and everything. And the birds I was producing were always sickly and everything. And it wasn't until my mentor came over and looked at my birds. He goes, "You need to cull and cull hard." He goes, "See all these medications? You need to get rid of them." I go, "What?" He started just tossing them in the trash can. And it was like, it took a number of years. First couple of years, I felt like I was culling most of my birds. And then every year it got less and less to now where I never have a sick bird. And he just said, "Don't treat sick birds. What wants to die must die." And you're just maintaining or perpetuating a weakness. I just lucked out because early on, I always had good mentors. I always found I always hung around people who knew more than I did. And I just listened to every word they said and tried to do everything they told me. And then what they told me led me to other things. And then the internet came, as far as buying books and learning more from the books, I was always reading and applying things. And then the internet came and just was a great source of information. I think you got to be careful with the internet because there's some really bad advice being passed around on the internet these days. So, right. And I just was good about hanging around with the right people. And so I didn't make a lot of mistakes that other people made. I'd say the biggest mistake would be when I first started, definitely, was starting out by breeding too many birds. I had so many different families. I couldn't even tell you how many I had. 12 or 15 families, different families. And I spent quite a few years just not making the progress that I wanted to make because I had very few pens and each family was only producing a handful of chicks here and there. And it just wasn't going anywhere. And it wasn't until I started little by little weeding down those birds, figuring out not what the best bird was, but what was the worst family. And then I got rid of them. And then I determined what was the worst one after that, got rid of that. And then I got down to the last three. And then I was kind of contemplating selling one family and someone made me an offer I couldn't refuse. I said, "Go ahead and take them." I was down to two. And then I just decided that I was going to maintain one family for a while. And I maintained that family for a long time. And with that family, it's called my Maximus line. And from that family, I created two other lines from that family. And now I got three, but it wasn't from bringing in a lot of birds or anything like that. And I think that I was the happiest when I got rid of all those birds and just concentrated on one family. It gave me more pens. I was able to hatch a lot more chicks and have a better selection. And I could cull harder without worrying about culling them all. And that's when I made the biggest progress. And that's when everything changed for me, is when I weeded them down to the one.
The flip side of that question is, the biggest, proudest or most successful moments. And was that it? Was that just realizing that the one family gave you the freedom to go deeper and further with your line, your family?
Yeah. When people get online or send me a message saying, "I love your birds, they're the best birds I've ever seen," you don't know what that does for me. It just shows me all my work is paid off. Everybody looks at me as having the best American games out there, because they know that I pay a lot of attention to detail, that I spend a lot of time perfecting that bloodline, and that I don't produce, maintain, or sell substandard birds. I see my birds, people take pictures of my birds, they put them on their avatar on Facebook and everything. Some people would take that personal. "That's my bird. That's my picture." I see them my pictures popping up in magazines and everything. That makes me feel good. And not only is that my bird, but everybody knows that's my bird. So that kind of, it kind of works in my favor that not only are they using my bird on their stuff, but everybody knows it's my bird and I get the credit for it. That's what makes me feel good is when I go out there and look at my birds and I'm just in awe still to this day that I've got such great birds and everybody likes them and everybody's sharing them and things like that. So I don't make my money's not on selling birds. I do sell a handful of birds to pay for the feed. My living is my greatest satisfaction, and where I make my living is the education side of it. So that's where I concentrate. Now, if I make a little money on birds, great, but that's not where my attention is. I'm just interested in creating the best birds possible and teaching people how to do the same thing.
Yeah, gotcha. So is there anything here as we wrap up that you want to make sure you share with listeners about any of it? Breeding, selection, mentality?
Yeah. determine what you want to do with your chickens and how far you want to go. If it's just a small few birds in your backyard for a few eggs, enjoy them. You know, they lighten up your yard. If it's about breeding, really take the time to find the right birds that you want to perpetuate, learn how to breed them properly, and don't be tempted to bring outside birds. Maybe try to find a good mentor that can guide you along the way. That's made all the difference in my life, is having the right mentors. Or, you know, you could join my website, and I'll help you there and see what you think. You can always quit if you want to, but there's a lot of good stuff in there. And, you know, just get up every morning and enjoy your chickens and think of the possibilities that there could be. You wouldn't believe what you can do. The genome and the genetics of birds and what's in there is so amazing that you could mold those birds into anything you want. You can sculpt them and mold them into, you could take like a group of birds, and by using the right breeding program, like a grading program, a whole flock of mongrels, you could actually turn them into a family. I think that's awesome. You know, so just know that the power, you have such a great power as far as selection and creating with the knowledge and the science, you know, what we know about genetics today and how to select them. And you can do amazing things with chickens by breeding them properly. So that would be my message, is just take your time, find the right birds, and go at it the right way.
Well, thank you so much, Kenny. I appreciate the chat. And just matter of housekeeping here as we wrap it up, I will put links to everything that we talked about in the show notes. That's pasturepoultrytalk.com/93. I'll put a link to the Breeders Academy in there, which I have just recently become a member of. So I'm currently in the process of reading material and just kind of checking that out. That is subscription based. Look in the show notes for information on how to get it, along with all the other stuff we talked about. And yeah, thanks for the chat. Really enjoyed it, Kenny.
Well, I had a great time. It was fun. Thanks, Mike.